He was told he had no fighting talent, spent 15 years working alone as a gatekeeper, and then got replaced by magic and fired. But when he leaves town and meets a mysterious saint, he discovers that the powerful magic he always thought was just his imagination is actually real. And it might be the strongest magic in the world. Royal stood in the grand hall with his friends beside him, his breathing rough and uneven. Everyone called him a hero, but right now, he didn't feel like one at all. Across the room, the demon Lord Lilius watched him with a lazy smile, her glowing eyes full of amusement. She praised his strength, then teasingly asked if he would like to serve under her, offering a special reward in return. Her voice crawled under his skin, and anger flared in his chest, only to burn hotter when he caught himself staring at her beauty instead of focusing. Before he could fall deeper into that haze, Cynthia's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Focus, Royal," she snapped sharply, like a judge passing sentence. Even as he tried to listen, his attention slipped again, and his gaze turned toward Lilius without meaning to. Rinka, calm but always straightforward, noticed right away. "Eyes forward," she said firmly. "This isn't the time for foolish thoughts." Everything about her voice and stance showed control and strength. Then came Sarah, her fists glowing with fire as she said, "Royal, quit fooling around or I'll make you regret it." Her flames roared softly, daring him to test her patience. Royal sighed quietly and muttered, Yeah, I get it." These people weren't just his comrades, they were his family, and for them, he would see this through to the end. He tightened his grip on his weapon, and his team nodded, each sharing the same fire in their eyes. Lilius grinned and stretched her hand out like a queen greeting challengers. "Then come," she purred, "show me your courage." Just as they were about to charge, everything around him blurred, colors melted, and sounds faded. When his vision cleared, he was no longer in the hall. Royal blinked and saw the sunset spilling across the guard post, painting the world gold and orange. His shift was over. He let out a small, bitter laugh, thinking, so much for being a hero. He was just a gatekeeper, lost in another daydream. As the light faded, a quiet disappointment settled over him. The dream had ended, right when it was getting good. These daydreams were the only thing keeping him from losing his mind during the endless hours he spent standing guard. He had been doing this job since he was first recruited, 15 long years ago. Back when he was 15, the knights noticed him and were amazed by how tall he was for his age. Grown men had to tilt their heads just to look him in the eyes. They praised his strong build and told him he had a bright future ahead. Royal's heart raced with excitement, thinking that everything in his life was finally coming together. But that feeling didn't last. Once he joined the order, whispers started spreading. People said he looked impressive, but he was hopeless with sword and spell. The cheers turned into quiet sighs and judging glances. When the commander inspected him, he offered kind words and said Royal should try magic instead. For a moment, hope sparked again, but no matter how hard he tried, even the easiest spells refused to work. His instructor lost patience, and that door closed too. He was reassigned, not to battlefields but to the North Gate, a quiet post where nothing ever happened. His duty was simple: stand still, stay silent, and send a message if something went wrong. Day after day, year after year, nothing changed. To keep himself from going numb, he escaped into his mind, where he was a mighty sorcerer with loyal friends and burning purpose. He fought monsters, saved the weak, and heard people call his name with respect instead of pity. His wandering thoughts were cut short when a knight approached and said the commander wanted to see him. Inside the office, the air felt heavy as the commander said he was being dismissed. His post would be replaced by a magic device, and just like that, 15 years vanished into nothing. Royal walked out quietly, every step echoing through empty halls as memories swirled in his head. Memories of praise, promises, and dreams of greatness. They once said his strength would make him a legend, but now they cast him aside like he never mattered. Old words of doubt came back. No talent, no skill, each one weighing him down. 15 years wasted standing still. Yet something inside him shifted, and a strange lightness replaced the pain. For the first time, he felt free. No more orders, no more empty duties. His life finally belonged to him. Without a second glance, he walked beyond the city walls with determination burning in his chest. He would become an adventurer. It was time for his story to begin. Days passed quietly, and nothing amazing happened. He helped an old woman who hurt her back, and that was it. Still, walking under the open sky felt better than rotting behind that gate. Soon he saw the adventurer town of Melki in the distance, with lively rooftops and fluttering banners filling him with hope. That was when he saw a girl ahead, gasping for breath, as if she had been running forever. Thinking this could be his first real adventure, he stepped forward to ask if she was okay. But when their eyes met, he froze and his throat tightened. He realized he hadn't had a normal conversation in years, and the words crumbled before they left his mouth. He stammered, and the girl shifted awkwardly, unsure whether to stay or run. Overwhelmed, Royal's knees gave out, and he collapsed to the ground. The girl stared for a second, then burst into laughter, unable to stop. At least, he thought. He managed to calm her down, even if he lost his dignity. Between giggles, she apologized and offered him a hand. When he stood, he noticed her ankle, swollen and twisted, but she still forced a smile, saying she was fine. Her courage made his chest tighten with guilt as he realized how foolish he had been. This wasn't a dream where he played the hero. It was real, and she was hurt, yet she still helped him when he looked like an idiot. He wanted to help her, not as a hero from his daydreams, but as himself. He imagined wearing a mage robe and casting a healing spell while she smiled through tears. Suddenly, a faint light flickered around her ankle, and the air hummed softly. Royal blinked as the swelling faded, and her ankle healed perfectly. The girl gasped and said, "That was amazing. I've never seen magic like that before." Royal pointed at himself, saying, "Wait, me?" Magic was rare and powerful, and only a few could ever master it. Yet somehow, he had done it. He stood frozen, unable to believe it. The girl stared in awe, and he shakily introduced himself. She smiled and said her name was Diz. But what confused him more was that the spell he used didn't even exist. It was one he had made up in his imagination long ago during boring guard shifts. Diz noticed a small cut on his cheek and teased, "If you're really that good, fix that too." Feeling awkward but curious, Royal raised his hand and tried. The scratch vanished instantly. Diz looked amazed, and Royal's mind spun in disbelief. This couldn't be real. Years ago, he had failed every test and was told he would never cast a spell. So why now? What had changed? Before he could think, Diz asked if he was going to Melky, and when he nodded, she suggested they travel together. That surprised him, since most people avoided him because of his height and clumsy nature. But Diz smiled and said she could tell he wasn't a bad person. Their journey began, and as they walked, Diz shared her story. She had once been a saintess in training, studying sacred magic day and night, but her prayers never worked, and the church cast her out. Angry, she tore off her robes and left. Later, she tripped, hurt her ankle, and that was when Royal found her. He wanted to cheer her up, but his words came out awkward. Still, she smiled and said she would become an adventurer. Even after all that, she walked with confidence and looked radiant. Before he could say more, a scream echoed through the forest. Both froze, and Diz said, "Can you use detection magic? We need to find where that came from." Royal hesitated, then remembered a spell from his daydreams and whispered its name. To his shock, the spell worked. The air shimmered, and he saw images of 3 high orcs attacking a human 500 meters away. Diz shouted, "Let's go!" and dashed through the trees. Royal stared at his hand, feeling his heart pound. For years, he thought he was powerless, but this was real. Maybe he could use other spells too. Another old fantasy came to him, of a giant dragon roaring across a ruined battlefield, and him standing tall, casting a spell of legend called Omnis. One strike, one victory. He whispered the word now almost without thinking. The air around him trembled and glowed faintly. Reality blurred, then sharpened again. His spell had locked onto something real. Ahead, the 3 high orcs were charging straight toward a group of knights. The knights froze wide-eyed and speechless as the impossible unfolded before them. One of them ran forward, desperation burning in his eyes, knowing there was no escape and that death was certain. But just as the orcs closed in, a blinding light exploded across the battlefield, and in an instant the monsters were gone, erased as if they never existed. The air crackled with leftover energy, and Diz, along with the surviving knight, stared in disbelief, their faces pale in the fading light. All that remained were blackened shadows on the ground. Royal lowered his hand, slowly scanning for danger. "Is everyone okay?" he asked, his voice uncertain. Diz nodded, still catching her breath. "We're fine, but that magic, was that really you?" she said. He hesitated, unsure how to answer, then gave a small nod. Diz's eyes lit up as she said, "That was incredible, you're seriously strong." And her words echoed in his mind. It finally sank in that the spells he imagined in his head were actually working. Healing spells, detection magic, and now power, strong enough to erase monsters in seconds. Everything he once thought impossible was real, but he couldn't understand why. Before he could think too deeply, the knights he saved approached. Bowing gratefully, from the carriage nearby, a young noblewoman stepped out, her golden hair shining in the sunlight. "I'm Flora, daughter of Lord Erdal. You have my deepest thanks for saving us," she said kindly. Royal stood frozen, unsure how to respond. His words caught in his throat. He knew he should say something, but his awkwardness hit hard. Then a strange idea came to him that if he could create magic from imagination, maybe he could imagine confidence too. It was either genius or really stupid, but he decided to try. He stood tall, forced a smile, and spoke. But his voice came out stiff and robotic, sounding more creepy than charming. The guards tensed and stepped protectively in front of Flora, while Royal panicked, realizing how bad it sounded. But before things got worse, Diz quickly waved her hand, saying, "Wait, he's harmless, he's just bad at talking." Trying to fix the mess? Diz knelt gracefully, her tone calm and polite as she explained everything. She apologized for Royal's strange behavior, saying he was just nervous and not used to nobles. Her kindness melted the tension like sunlight on ice. Flora smiled gently and apologized back for misunderstanding, then invited both of them to her family's estate in Melki as honored guests during the carriage ride. Royal stayed quiet watching the scenery, while Diz chatted with Flora like an old friend. Their laughter filled the air and he couldn't help thinking that Diz had a warmth that drew people in naturally. She made conversations feel easy and bright while he struggled to say a word. Royal sighed softly, thinking Diz was like the ancient dragon of communication, a being with social power beyond mortal reach. The silly thought made him smile, and a new idea began to form that maybe he could imagine better social skills just like he did with magic. When they arrived at the estate, Flora welcomed them warmly, and Royal stood beside Diz, deciding that no matter what he had to learn to talk like a normal person, even if he could never be as smooth as her. As they waited in the grand hall, Diz turned to him suddenly and asked, "Are you solo?" He blinked confused, until she laughed lightly and said, "I mean, are you adventuring alone without a party?" And he rubbed his neck, admitting it was his first real adventure. Diz looked surprised since she thought he was a veteran, and after a pause, she smiled brightly, saying, "Then how about we form a party, you and me?" Later that evening, Flora's father greeted them warmly and thanked Royal personally for protecting his daughter. The table was full of food, and he told them to eat as much as they wanted. Royal sat quietly listening as Diz and Flora talked happily about adventures to come. Flora even offered them a reward and told them they were welcome to ask for help anytime. But Royal's thoughts drifted back to Diz's offer about forming a party, and he couldn't stop thinking that maybe for once he wasn't meant to fight alone. After dinner, Diz teased him for thinking too much before heading to bed, leaving Royal smiling awkwardly but grateful for her company. That night, he lay awake staring at the ceiling, doubt creeping into his thoughts like a quiet shadow. Someone like him, did he really belong beside her? He clenched his fist, gave his cheek a light slap and muttered, "Stop overthinking, be confident." It was awkward, but it helped calm him. By morning, his nerves buzzed like lightning as he walked to Diz's door, rehearsing what to say. But when she opened it, the words tumbled out. Want to officially form a party?" And Diz smiled easily, saying, "Sure," like it was the simplest thing in the world, before he could react. Flora appeared cheerful as ever and joined them, chatting away. Diz stretched, saying, "I slept like a rock," and Royal watched her, quietly smiling, thinking how natural she was with everyone she met. In his mind, he called her the ancient dragon of smooth conversation, a being of pure charm and confidence, and he was half amazed, half jealous. Soon it was time to leave the estate, and Flora thanked them again, saying they were welcome anytime. After their farewells, Royal and Diz stepped back onto the open road under the bright sun, and for the first time in years, Royal felt something new. His life that had once been frozen was finally moving again, and he wiped his eyes quickly, blaming the dust. "So what's the plan now?" Diz asked with a grin. Royal paused, thinking about what adventurers usually did, like register at the guild or stock up on supplies, but before he could answer, Diz said, "Let's find a base first. I'm tired of cheap inns. If we're staying in Melki, I want a real place to come back to." And Royal nodded, agreeing right away. They visited the real estate office where the manager Zambi leaned back, smugly sipping tea. He had been trying for years to rent out the cursed mansion on the edge of town, and when he saw them, his eyes lit up, thinking they were perfect prey. He smiled and quoted a rent of 150,000 yen, calling it a special deal for such a large property, even with ghosts. At that moment, Diz subtly touched her earlobe, and Royal recognized the signal instantly. He stood up and glared coldly until Zambi's smirk faded. Diz crossed her arms calmly and said, "Exorcisms for a place like that could cost 2 million yen." And Zambi swallowed hard, offering a lower price. But the signal came again. Royal's glare grew heavier, and Diz leaned forward, saying, 50,000. The man trembled and finally slammed the papers down. Agreeing to the deal, outside in the sunlight, Diz and Royal grinned at each other, their first victory as partners complete. Royal scratched his head and asked, "I didn't go too far, did I?" The guy looked like he was about to cry, and Diz laughed softly, saying, "Maybe a little, but that mansion's a ghost trap, so we got a fair deal." Royal sighed, realizing what came next. Since the haunted house would need cleansing, the place was crawling with twisted spirits formed from pain and sorrow. Alone they weren't dangerous, but when thousands gathered, they turned into a wraith. A being born from anger and regret that poisoned the air itself. Now Royal and Diz stood before the decaying mansion at the edge of town, the air heavy with death and despair, its windows cracked like broken eyes. One look told them it was no normal place. Diz sighed, saying, "Should have asked for even lower rent," then turned serious, adding, "Even a top priest would struggle with this thing." Royal didn't answer, his mind drifting into a daydream where Diz became his imagined partner. Royal asking him for strength. Shaking off the illusion, he stepped forward, raised his hand as light gathered in his palm and said, I am the one who purges the shadows, as a brilliant flash fired straight into the mansion. A piercing, otherworldly shriek echoes from within, raw and full of pain. Diz flinches at the sound but quickly regains her composure, analyzing the display she just witnessed. Her eyes widen slightly because that technique shortened. Chanting is not something ordinary mages can do. Only the best of the best can pull it off, instantly compressing and releasing magic. Like that takes an unbelievable amount of control and raw power. Watching Royal pull it off so casually leaves Diz speechless, and she cannot help but wonder who this man really is. Royal, on the other hand, looks completely calm. "You should be safe now," he says simply. Diz blinks, still dazed, and gives a small nod. When he repeats himself, she finally smiles, gives him a light pat on the back and murmurs softly, "Thanks." And the simple gesture stirs something warm inside him, an unfamiliar but pleasant feeling.